Psychoanalytic film theory presents cinema as a projection of a dream world, where images are used as a medium to evoke suppressed desires, urges, and fears, which are hidden deep within our subconscious minds. This genre of film is largely constructed and interpreted upon the theories of Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan, the pioneers of psychoanalysis. In his film Secrets of a Soul, George Pabst defines psychoanalysis as a recognition of our desires and passions, which remain unknown to our conscious mind. In dark hours of psychological conflict, these unconscious drives attempt to assert themselves. However, our subconscious desires are not formed in a vacuum. Rather, they are influenced by our cultural contexts and our experiences as a child. This is evident in Polanski's 1965 Repulsion and Aronofsky's 2010 Black Swan, two films that reflect a seemingly innocent female protagonist undergoing psychological decay. Repulsion is a psychological horror directed by Roman Polanski in the 1960s. Repulsion conveys a narrative of Carol, a young, schizophrenic woman with androphobia who internalizes her fear of men. As she isolates herself in her apartment, her psychological conflict and repressed sexuality culminates into an episode of homicidal madness. In her article Sex and Psychosis, Baker asserts that repulsion is an alternative to the deeply conservative ideals of suburban domesticity and gender roles which were used to oppress 1960s women in an early Cold War climate of international instability. On the other hand, Black Swan represents the internal struggle of a ballet dancer in pursuit of artistic perfection. Nina's obsessive nature and her inability to play both the role of the Black Swan and the White Swan results in her uncovering her sinister side, hidden deep below her consciousness. Paraphrased from Marston, Black Swan signifies the idealized construction of neoliberal femininity, with the focus on a fragile ballerina as the hyperspectacle, who strives for perfection according to the societal dictates of those who she performs for. This comparative analysis will focus on the presence of the subconscious drive within each of these films' protagonists. A comparative analysis of these films' cinematic structure and thematic concerns allows for an adaptation of the psychoanalytic genre into two contrasting cultural and social contexts, being that of 1960s Britain and 2010 United States. In doing so, it will explore the psychological ramifications of extreme submission and ambition during two cultural contexts with contrasting gender expectations. Through the cinematic manipulation of time and space, the duality of fractured identities, and the presence of Freudian psychoanalytic elements, both films assert that instinctual and primal motivations on a subconscious level dictate much of our actions on a conscious level. Both Black Swan and Repulsion manipulate spatial and temporal elements of film in order to reflect the central protagonist's descent into psychosis. In both films, this is mainly conjured through the use of a subjective and handheld camera, which breaks the uniformity of cinematic space and intrudes on the character's privacy. This idea is also present in the editing, which increases in tempo in relation to the character's internal psyche. In Repulsion, Carol's mental disorder is mirrored through the confinement of cinematic space and the repetitive use of the extreme close-up. This technique has the effect of contributing to Carol's distortive self-image and effectively places the audience inside the entrapped mind of Carol. In this regard, close-ups and obtrusive camera presence through a handheld camera are used to play upon Carol's fear of being approached by men. In the scene where Carol hallucinates getting raped, an extreme close-up is used as the camera exploits every possible option of space in order to reflect Carol's psychological repression. Within the apartment, atmospheric lighting and low-angle shots, used in conjunction with a wide-angle lens, are employed to reinforce the claustrophobic and confined atmosphere of the apartment. In this regard, Repulsion employs a forced perspective to distort the audience's visual perception, which is reflective of Carol's psychosis. In a similar fashion, Black Swan uses dynamic camera movement to reflect chaos and disorder from the perspective of Nina. Aronofsky establishes Nina's psychotic claustrophobia by entering her dreams through a subjective and handheld camera, which has the effect of distorting the audience's perception on what is reality and what is part of Nina's illusion. Similar to Repulsion, Nina's psychological decay is mediated upon the confinement of cinematic space, and also the editing tempo. In the beginning of the film, stable dolly shots and long takes were used to connote a sense of order and graciousness. However, as Nina delves deeper into her psychosis, stable dolly shots and long takes are exchanged with shaky, handheld cameras as Nina begins to lose touch with reality. This is epitomized in the club sequence, representing Nina's liberation from her restrictive white swan side and the embracement of her primal instincts. In this scene, the fast-paced editing and pulsing lights elicits a flickering phenomena, which, when combined with the disjointed audio, effectively destabilizes the audience's perception. Moreover, obtrusive camera presence and close-ups are used in the same manner as Repulsion. For example, in the bathtub scene, the constrained and trapped framing places the audience in the confined and claustrophobic state of Nina. In addition, a point-of-view shot is used in conjunction with an extreme close-up to once again enter the fragmented perspective of Nina. Just like we are able to gain ingress into the mind of Carol through the confinement of cinematic space around her, we are also able to gain ingress into the mind of Nina through the subjective and handheld camera. In Black Swan, visual elements such as lighting and costume are used to convey a sense of duality and to mirror Nina's descent into psychosis. The visual contrast between black and white, supported by the monochromatic tone, effectively juxtapose the two sides of Nina, the white, gracious swan and the black, seductive swan. In the beginning of the film, Nina primarily dresses in pink and white, connoting her innocence and childish demeanor. However, as the narrative develops and Nina loses touch of her innocence, she begins to dress in darker shades, asserting that the black swan is corrupting her. Therefore, Nina's dark transformation, conjured through the changing color tones of her costume, reflects the duality of her fractured identity. In Repulsion, however, psychological duality is conjured through the contrasting shadows and atmospheric lighting, which mirror Carol's nightmares and hallucinations. In particular, chiaroscuro lighting is commonly used within the film. Chiaroscuro lighting is the visual contrast between high-key and low-key lighting, which, in this case, emphasizes the duality of Carol's fragmented identity. In both films, the mirror is a recurring motif that represents the true subconscious state of the character, that is often concealed from their active consciousness. Both films rely on mirrors to represent not only the character's illusion, but to also evoke their subconscious fears. For example, mirrors routinely dominate the mise-en-scène of Black Swan, enforcing the dual nature of Nina's persona. As the narrative develops, Nina loses the ability to control her mirror reflections, implying that she is detached from reality and her identity. In Repulsion, mirrors are also an important part of the film's mise-en-scène, used to externalize the internal fears of Carol. According to Devon Supine, Polanski takes the internal anxiety of Carol and projects that onto the objective world of her apartment, denying us the safety of retreating into an explanation that is merely due to Carol's psychosis. We are denied any clear explanation as to what is objective reality and what is part of Carol's imagination. This is evident in the scene where Carol is haunted by a man in her mirror. In addition, both films share an underlying link in their application of Sigmund Freud's idea of the uncanny. Freud defines the uncanny as a psychological experience that is strangely familiar and foreign at the same time, evoking a feeling of extreme discomfort. In both Repulsion and Black Swan, the notion of the uncanny is presented by projecting the internal fears of the character onto their immediate environments. For example, in Repulsion, the uncanny is represented through the cracks that form in Carol's wall, which act as a physical manifestation of her fractured state of mind. Furthermore, Carol's male paranoia is projected onto her hallway through the grotesque imagery of male hands that pierce through the wall and attempt to molest her. In the same manner, the uncanny is presented in Black Swan through the surrealist imagery of the paintings within Nina's room that come to life, which suggest a disconnect from reality and reinforce Freud's psychoanalytic concept of the uncanny. In conclusion, through the spatial and temporal manipulation of cinematic space and the duality of fractured identities, both Repulsion and Black Swan are able to convey narratives of disenfranchised and psychologically conflicted females in two contrasting cultural contexts.